Welcome to the Selfish Griever podcast. Today I have Vanessa May, who is a grieving mom and now also a holistic grief coach. And so I asked her to come onto the show so she could share some of her story and also her unique perspective as a holistic grief coach, some of the things that we have to be aware of and also working on to heal after experiencing traumatic loss. So welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Can you share with us about your son?
Yes, so my lovely son, Harry, died age 24. I was working as a nutritional therapist and a wellbeing coach and just going about my business. Life was fine. And then suddenly, as you know, the world is turned upside down. And I plunged into the most terrible place, as we all do when we lose a child. To find my way through, already being a coach, my inclination was kind of like, how can I fix this? And of course, you can't fix grief, and particularly not that kind of loss. But it was sort of in me to start to look for ways to just ease my path a bit. And one of the first ways I found was to read. So I just read non-stop. And then I started to write. And that turned into my book, Love Untethered, How to Live When Your Child Dies. And I pretty much wrote it in real time. So it's the first year of being a bereaved mum, and everything that I felt is pretty raw. I know you've read some of it, and I don't hold back. I tell it like it is. And actually that's the thing that the feedback I've had is that people have said, oh, it's like you're telling my story. It was just so raw, so brutally honest. And I think people have found that easy to identify, and I identify with. I don't hold back. But then I thought, okay, so how am I going to use the tools that I already had and maybe help people? So the second part of the book is just how to try, because there's no magic wand, as we know, to navigate a loss like this. So I give advice on nutrition, therapies you can try. I also talk a lot about my spiritual awakening and how losing Harry, when I saw his body, I knew he wasn't gone. I knew he wasn't in that shell, but I just knew for certain he was somewhere, and I had to find him. So the book's also about my quest to find him, which I did. And as we've talked already, but it does help you to believe that they're still with us. We still have to deal with the everyday, getting up, going to work, getting other kids to school, whatever it might be. And so it's a really tough path, but knowing that their soul lives on is a way to, I think, propel us forward to carry on living. And also, in my case, I decided I wanted to sort of transfer my skills into something that was more appropriate for the world I now lived in. So I'm now working as a holistic grief coach. So I use all my skills, mind, body and spirit. So when somebody comes to work with me, we'll look at all aspects of loss, because I think it's very easy that people we know the emotional pain of it. But I had huge physical reactions. Spiritually, I opened up. So there's so much more to grief than just the emotional toll it takes, which is considerable. But so yeah, and then I wrote I was asked to write a second book called Supporting Your Grieving Client, a guide for wellness practitioners. So that's kind of, again, sharing what I know, because we live in a very grief averse society, and we probably all come across practitioners, doctors, therapists who perhaps haven't been the most sensitive or the most understanding through lack of knowing what we know. I mean, and it can be hard. So that's what I'm doing. It's still really tough. I miss my son terribly, physically, but I do talk to him. I feel him with me, and I feel that I've got some kind of purpose now in helping others in my position. So yes, that's
Yeah, I think that's so interesting about the book you're being asked to write now for how to support your grieving client, because I had an episode come out this season with my grief counselor that I worked with for about a year, and she herself had experienced her own child loss. It had happened like 20 years prior when her children were infants, and it was so pivotal for me in my work with her, but also something I just kind of fell in with her. I wasn't necessarily looking for that. And we talk about in that episode kind of the nuance of, should people grieving only seek out counselors, therapists, people who, in supporting them, who've experienced grief themselves, because otherwise, how do they know, how to best support you? And then kind of the juxtaposition of, somebody who gets diagnosed with cancer and goes to a doctor doesn't necessarily see a doctor who's had cancer before or knows all the things. But I think, as you were talking, what I was thinking about is that I think the grief space has gotten a lot better about acknowledging pain and emotion. And I mean, it's definitely changed from like my parents' generation, when you just didn't talk about it anymore. You put away all the pictures. That person basically didn't exist. Like, we're not at that point anymore, but we're not quite at the point where there's enough people who have experienced traumatic grief, I think, essentially being surveyed on like, what was your experience like beyond emotions, so that it's something that other people can recognize and try and help serve and support. And it sounds like your book is going to help fill that need, so that it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody who's trying to support a griever has had to experience their own traumatic loss, but that they can have a broader picture than just, oh, that person's really sad all the time. Because I definitely experienced what you're talking about, that there were a lot of other symptoms of grief that I did not expect. I didn't know how to recognize them in the beginning, and I didn't have anybody to talk to who could validate, what was happening to me. And it can be really, it can add this layer of scariness, really, to what you're experiencing, in addition to everything that you're already experiencing emotionally that is heartbreaking and scary and all those things. So I think that's going to be beautiful work.
All the layers we have on top of the actual pain of loss. It's the physicality of it, it's the confusion, it's having people not validate it, expecting you to be doing better than you are. You've got the 5 stages of loss, as if grief, as if you'll get to acceptance and then brilliant, it'll all be done. Whereas we know the 5 stages, you go through them all multiple times, back and forwards, up and down, and even if you do accept your loss, it doesn't make it all right. You're still living without that person. And I do work with a lot of people who I agree, you don't have to have had the same loss to be a very good practitioner, but sometimes it does help. And I do work with a lot of people who come to me because they know what I've gone through, and so they know I'm going to get it. And I think it's when you're working with a therapist who perhaps you think, no, you really don't get it. And when I did my, because I'm a certified grief educator, when I did that course, I was amazed how many therapists were on the course, because they obviously didn't feel their training gave them enough on the subject of grief. So they didn't specify perhaps in grief, and grief had probably been part of their training, but they'd obviously had some grieving clients, and they thought, I don't know enough. I feel I need to, bolster my learning. So
Yeah, which is amazing, because I think there can be the other end of the spectrum with therapists who think, oh yeah, my grandma died, when she was 90 and I was in high school, and I remember what that was like, so I know what it's like to grieve. Or my first therapist who was like, oh, my cat died, and that was devastating for me, so I understand what you're going through. And I just, it's so hard, because on the one hand, I have empathy for the fact that you struggled through something that for you was the hardest thing you've had to go through. However, comparing like your 2 weeks of sadness, even devastation maybe, to my year of not being able to sleep because my son died is not even like remotely the same. You don't understand. So it's hard, and it's a conversation I come across a lot.
Yeah.
I think a lot of grievers experience that. They hear people say, oh, I know how you feel because XYZ happened to me. And I think it takes conscientiousness that grief is not the same. It's not the same all across the board. It doesn't.
It really isn't. I mean, they say, the worst loss is your loss. And that is true. So if you've lost your cat and it's the only loss you've known, it's going to be devastating and it's going to hurt because you've nothing to compare it with. But overall, I think sensibly we have to know that there are some losses that are life-changing and involve a great deal of trauma. I think it's the trauma as well that sort of adds another dimension, that makes it really difficult to cope with.
Yeah.
But it's all
hard. Which actually I'm curious to know from your perspective, because clearly like now you are out of the first year of grief. You've been doing a lot of self-work, and you now work on helping support other people. And I'm just curious how, I don't even know if I know exactly how to word this, but like, how did you feel about supporting your grief when you started to be at a point that you were like capable of integrating back into society more, starting to take on more like responsibilities or just like life activities, as opposed to in the beginning? I feel like there's so much space for your grief because you're just not capable of handling anything else but your grief. But then as you start to heal and you move forward, you just naturally start integrating back into what were your kind of like, what are daily routines, daily life demands. And for me, I start to feel like I'll look up and all of a sudden realize like I haven't had space for my grief. I haven't been thinking about it. I've just been like going and going and going, and then kind of stopping and wondering like, what's happening right now? Should I be, I guess, grieving more? And then when I do have moments of grief and feeling like, well, I don't have time for this right now because I've got to, be somewhere at in an hour to go pick up Maverick, and before that I need to get these chores done, or feeling like I've now committed myself to more things than I was taking on before, and so it's just hard to carve out that space.
But I think, don't you, that it will come in if you ignore it for too long? It's sort of, I think it's healthy that we're living our lives, that we have to live and grieve at the same time. but sometimes there are days or weeks where we're just really busy, and you know, you've got a little one, so you're living in the moment. It's very full on. So you're bound to, it's like a distraction. But I think the minute you pause, it can, sometimes it can come in. You know, they talk about grief waves, don't they? I suppose for me, because of writing and now the work I do, well, also the work you do, we are talking about grief a lot. You know, that's part of what we do now. So for you and I, we're not really fully stepping back, but it's different, isn't it? Because when you're talking to someone, or when I'm working with somebody and hearing about their grief, I'm doing it from a different perspective. So my grief's on the back burner, and your grief probably is on the back burner, but it's still there. It's like that. I find that it's always there. I don't really. When people say, I think about them every day, I think every day. I think every minute is pervaded in some way. I mean, I function and I do other things and I can focus on other things, but it's just, I feel like it's in me. The grief is in me, in my bones. It is, but I'm probably not explaining it very well, because it's not like I'm on my knees wailing, and like I used to, but it's there, and it's something we carry, isn't it? That's how. But I guess everyone's experience is different. You know, so
It's so hard to articulate, I think.
Isn't it? I'm not doing very well, but I think
No,
probably
you're doing great. I feel the same way. I'm like, I don't really know how to explain. I guess, you know, and I even was thinking about, I agree with you, like, Orion's with me all throughout the day, all, you know, woven through my thoughts and my actions. And yes, part of that is because of the work that I do, that I am always in a, you know, steeped in this environment of grief, but it's not the same as me grieving. But also I think it's so natural for me to, I mean, he was my son, your son was your son. Like, it's so natural as a mom for them to already be in your thoughts all the time, even when they were here with us, that part doesn't really change. So it doesn't feel like I think about him differently than I did before. But like this morning I did a meditation, and I saw him, saw Orion, and like picked him up and hugged him. And I just, out of nowhere, like was overcome with this emotion and feeling of like, oh my God, I miss that. And I was like crying in this meditation. And that's, I mean, I meditate frequently, and I always envision him, you know, just being there like with me, and that he's like this constant source of just energetic support. And so that caught me off guard. And then it made me think about, you know, this morning, like, you know, kind of like what you said, like, have I not been giving the space? And that's why I had that kind of like strong reaction. But then also this morning I thought, like, man, I'd really like to just, you know, break down and spend time crying and grieving. I feel like now in my grief journey, that feeling has changed from what it was like in the beginning. In the beginning, those kinds of behaviors and crying, like that deep crying, was scary to me, and now it feels like therapeutic and a release.
Yeah.
But it's a whole process. I think for people who've been through this, they'll understand what I'm talking about, but it's draining. You really like dig into the pain, the sadness, you release all of it through the crying, and then you feel afterwards like depleted, but also like physically, like, I don't know, sometimes I have a headache afterwards, or, you know, it's a whole physical reaction happening, not just emotional. And this morning I remember thinking, like, I don't have time for that. I have time for meditation, but I need, you know, like, so I took a few moments, but I did not give myself the permission that I would have in the beginning, or even just, you know, a year ago, to like go there and release all of that. And today I felt like I had to be like, okay, it's time to button that up, because now I got to go to the next thing that has to get done today, and move on. And I don't know. And then too, like, I saw a sign this morning, a 777 on a license plate, which for me is an angel sign of like love being sent from your loved ones on the other side. And I saw that, and it just immediately, I saw it like when I was sitting at a light waiting, to go. So I had a moment, but I immediately teared up thinking like, oh, Ryan's, reminding me
Yeah.
he's here, and I was having a stressful moment. It's like after school drop off and I'm running late, and I'm thinking about all the things that need to get done. And I saw that sign, and it just kind of made me like snap out of it and then think like, oh, he's with me and I miss him,
Well, that's the
and
impression I
having
get
some
listening to
tears.
you. You've just described your grief as has changed, and mine has as well. And so you are very connected with him in your meditation and seeing the signs. So you're very connected. So it's not like you've forgotten what's happened. Obviously not. But you're so connected. So but we obviously then we miss the physical presence of them. But that expression, death ends a life, not a relationship, is so true, and never more so than the mother-child bond, because that is eternal. That's an eternal bond that we have. And you've just described it brilliantly, going, oh, you've sort of been saying, oh, I don't know if I'm grieving anymore or enough or whatever you're saying. And actually I'm hearing you going, but you're connecting with him all the time. And funnily enough, before this, I just thought, oh, I'll just have a little look through my book, because I'm in a different, it's about the Love Untethered I'm talking about, it's about the first year. And kind of exactly what you're saying. I was reading the raw pain that I talk about, the cry, just the shock, the devastation, and it did make me think I am in a different place with my grief, but it's not like my grief has gone. It's just changed. And the more, as you've just described, we're able to keep the connection and can, spiritually feel their presence and have a spiritual or a non-physical relationship with them, then the easier it is, because it's some comfort, isn't it? It is some comfort. But yeah, and what you say, we sometimes we just have to get on with the day. But it will come in, like you wanted to have a cry, maybe you cry later, maybe it'll come out in another way, or something else happens that triggers you to feel upset. But really what it's about is perhaps, the longing and the missing, really, which we don't, that does come back in waves, I find. But yeah, but it is different, and we do move into a different place with it, with the grief, I think.
Yeah, and I think in the beginning, when everything was so all-consuming, my grief for him and my grief for me, really, that I had fear of the day that would come that I didn't feel that way anymore. And now I'm, here, I'm in that place where it's not all-consuming anymore, but it's not scary the way that I pictured that it would be, because it's not a complete disconnect from him either. It's morphed and changed, and it's really more that my healing has happened, right? He's still there the same way that he was right after he passed. That connection has always remained constant. It's more about my healing around being able to like recognize that connection and grasp that concept and accept that like this is what it is now, and then just being part of that instead of part of what I had before with him physically. So
yeah, absolutely.
So tell me, Vanessa, what is the sign that you get from your son? I think you shared it with me before, and I remember, and I thought of you yesterday because of it, but I want you to share with the listeners what's the sign you get from your son most often.
Yeah, I mean, I've had lots of signs. They say they send less signs once they know that you get that they're around. But my main sign is that Harry does this on the side of my head. So it just feels like gentle kind of tickling. He's always on the right side. Sometimes I'll shiver down one side of my body, or just felt it now. And I kind of think that's, I mean, you know, people might be listening, they might be thinking, oh, she's making it up. But that is what I feel. And I think it makes, because it only happens on one side. If it was all over, maybe I could go, oh, I'm just a bit cold. But to shiver on one side and to get this feeling on one side of my head. Anyway, I'm taking it as my sign. I feel it is. And it's comforting, you know.
Yeah.
And we were talking about birds. I think you were talking about cardinals. We have robins. So those signs are quite generic. But even so, I'll take any sign. I'll take feathers, robins. But I think my most personal sign is when he sort of tickles the side of my head, on my hair, just very gentle. It feels really nice. Or when I get that sort of shiver down one side.
Is that something that he ever did when he was alive, like when he was physically present here, touch your hair?
No,
or is that just something you noticed?
really.
I'm asking because I'm so impressed that you recognize that sign, because I think those are the ones that are the easier ones to overlook. It's kind of hard to deny when there's, like, you know, for me, my sign is hummingbirds. It's hard to deny when there's a hummingbird like right in front of my face, right? Like that's just hovering right there, acting uncharacteristically. But I think the things that you experience physically can sometimes be so subtle, you know, or so easy for your mind to just kind of ignore and move right by. Yeah. And yesterday when I was working on content, I can't even remember right now what I was initially working on. I think I was editing something. I felt like this, I don't know, like tingling, like it felt like my hair was being moved. It was on my right side. It was like here towards the front. Oh, and I thought, and it was so, the sensation was so strong that at first I thought there was like something in my hair, you know, like that. And I was inside my house. So but I thought like like a fly. I thought something had landed there. I even like, I realized, and I was working. So, you know, like I was focused on what I was doing, but I realized that I felt it so much that I like went to touch my hair where it was happening, and then realized like, oh, there's nothing there. And so, but it was funny because it kept happening. It would happen, and then it would stop for a little bit, and then it would happen again. And then like an hour later, I was in an interview, recording a podcast interview with someone, and it started happening during the podcast. And I think I started smiling because I was like kind of laughing to myself, like, oh, and I was starting to take it as the sign of like, yeah, you're on the right track. Like, you know, or whatever you're talking, when, you know, like when you say something that's very aligned and then you get those physical sensations. Yes. Spiritual, like practitioners will say that I get goosebumps, or I feel shivers, or they have different signs, tingling sometimes in different parts of their body. Anyway, and so I was thinking of you yesterday because I was like, this is what Vanessa talks about, like feeling that, you know,
do you
her
think
hair
our sons have been talking?
Probably. I mean, they're here with us, so they've heard us talking.
Well, maybe.
And then, and then I thought, well, and the other thing I thought was that I never would have connected that to a sign had I not talked to you about it. Had I not heard you already, like, I think I'm sure, I mean, I know I have experienced times where I felt tingling, not maybe all over body tingles, but, you know, different things where it's normal, right? Like you're stressed and you feel muscle twitches, or something, you know, happens physically and you're just like, oh, that's just, you know, and most of the time it's like, oh, that's irritating. Why won't that stop? And so I've never thought of them as being signs. And then I started wondering,
maybe
like,
they are. But yeah. I think the sort of decider is when is if it keeps happening, it's in this, and it's exactly like you described. You think, oh, there's a fly on me, and then you're like, oh, and that's how. And then when it kept happening in the same place or the same side of my head, I was like, why isn't it happening on the left side? Why don't I ever get that feeling on the left side? And I just thought, and I just remember going, Harry, is that you? And then it kept happening. So, you know, just keep asking for that sign if you want it. Because it's quite nice. Because And Harry was he was a hugger. He was, even though he was 24, he wasn't little, but ever since he was a little boy, he was very affectionate, very physical, got loads of hugs. And that's the kind of thing that you miss so much, isn't it? So it doesn't surprise me that he would give me a very physical sign like that, actually. But I love that it happened to you as well. That's brilliant.
Yeah. And, even this morning I was thinking about, I don't know, I always have this struggle between, on the one hand, I want people to feel so comfortable in believing in the signs. Just give yourself the permission. There's nothing, holding you back. You don't have to tell anybody else if you don't want to. There's no need to feel like you're being silly, because you don't have to share it with anyone else. You can just let yourself believe and take the comfort that comes from them. I you don't have to be hesitant or want it, but also dismissive of it. Oh, well, I got this sign, but it's probably nothing, or everybody probably gets these, or, the things people say that are dismissive of it. But at the same time, I recognize there are times when I even think am I just being crazy that I've decided that this is a sign, that I've decided that every time I see this. But this morning I thought to myself, you know what, even if for the naysayers or the people who want to say that it's not real, it's just you making it up. Even if that is true, there's still something to be said about that you are conditioning your mind that every time you see whatever it is you decide is your sign, or anytime you experience whatever it is you decide is your sign, that then it's triggering you to think of your loved one.
Exactly.
And you're programming that into your life then in a way that it can happen organically, right? I can't control when hummingbirds show up outside my window or cross my path, even in a store. It just happens naturally, and it starts to bring more of this, I think, authenticity into your day, where it feels less contrived. It's not you just sitting in front of, your loved one's picture all day thinking about them, or every time you walk, you round this corner, there's this picture hanging on the wall that you're going to see it. Because I think at a certain point, then those kinds of things, you start to get desensitized to, your body knows to anticipate it. You don't react the same anymore. But when these things happen that are just natural, unexpected, organic, it's just this great feeling of this natural reminder. When somebody who's living randomly calls you on the phone and, unexpectedly, and it pops up on your screen, and you're like, oh yeah, I haven't thought of them. I wanted to talk to them, or whatever. And so I think that it's incredible that we can do that we can create these opportunities, even if it's you contriving it, if that's what you want to believe that it is. But I believe, based on the times that the hummingbirds show up, that are so synchronized with when I'm having a hard moment, when I'm immediately thinking of Orion, when I happen to glance a direction that I was not looking, and, a second later, a hummingbird zooms into sight. When I think about the odds of, if I looked 1 minute later, I wouldn't have seen it, or 1 minute sooner, I wouldn't have seen it, then that's real. That's a real synchronicity happening that I didn't control. So,
and I think sometimes we just have to kind of think nobody else is in our position. If it makes us feel better, let us have it.
Yeah.
It's not doing any
harm. Or let
harm.
yourself have it.
Let yourself have, exactly. Yeah, for anyone who might be listening who's going, oh, I'm not sure, say, I'll just choose to believe it. And the main point is, it connects you to your person. It connects you. The sign connects you, but whatever connects you is important. It just happens to be the sign that you're choosing to decide is real and from them, and that they're moving your direction, your eye to the hummingbird, or the sensation on the side of your head, or whatever. And we have to take whatever we can to make this as easy as it can be, because it's never easy, but easier. So whatever acts as a little bit of a cushion, softens it a little bit, I think is important to take. So, yeah. bring
Yeah,
on
and
the
even
sun.
from the holistic approach, I was thinking about as you were talking that doing those things is not even just for your emotional benefit, but I mean, our bodies are so intricate, and the hormonal, imbalances that happen when you're experiencing all of these emotions, and then also like the hormones that are released when you're experiencing happier moments, when you're, so I would say to some extent, like seeing those signs, if it really brings you a sense of comfort when you see them, letting yourself have that, leaning into it, also can lead to this physical like improvement, I think, and
Yeah.
rebalancing of releasing the
Endorphins,
dopamine and
yeah, dopamine, serotonin, and all those good feelings. And when you're grieving, you have, or when you're traumatized, you have hormones like adrenaline and cortisol that do untold damage to the body. So let's take anything that is going to counterbalance that, really. Just from that aspect, it's important that we do anything that makes us feel a little bit better. Like you were talking about meditation, things like energy healing, Reiki, that kind of stuff. It all just, it doesn't, it's not going to change what's happened. But if it gives us a moment of respite, then we need to take it.
yeah, and it's a domino effect that then
Yeah.
leads into maybe it's easier for you to like reach for that healthier food, or you are less stressed throughout the day about all the other random things, happening because you've taken a moment to like find some balance and some peace at some
Yeah.
point during your day. And because I think when you talk about the physical things that are also symptoms of grief, it feels like it's this cascading effect, right? It starts with the trauma and the emotional loss, but then it like knocks over everything. I mean, like I didn't sleep. I was on like high alert all the time. I couldn't calm my mind down. I gained like 30 pounds in I think like the first 6 months. And I wasn't binge eating or eating, ridiculous amounts of food, but I think all of those things that were happening in my body that I didn't understand because I don't have that level of education about my physical system. I never needed to, but were wreaking havoc
Yeah.
everywhere.
Well,
And
the
it seems
cortisol will
like,
affect, that probably was the cause. Cortisol, the stress hormone, can lead to weight gain. I mean, it's, and I did
yeah,
have a little bit of this knowledge. It didn't make any difference. It was still all happening to me as well. But it's,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, as you know, Bessel van der Kolk, the trauma specialist, he's written a book called The Body Keeps the Score. The body keeps the score. So when you have huge trauma like loss of a child, that has what you did you call it, cascading or a ripple effect? I can't remember what you said, but that sort of knock-on effect through everything. So anything we can do to counterbalance that, meditation, breathing exercises, and sleep. I mean, sleep goes out of the window, and that's like a particular form of torture. You've lost your child, and then it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and you can't sleep, and you're going to a very, very dark place. It's feel there's a cruelty about it, and you
yeah,
have to somehow claw your way back as much as you can. And some people struggle more than others with that.
yeah,
You know.
yeah. And I think remembering or having the perspective of that the reverse is also true, right? As much as like the grief impacts and cascades and makes everything else fall out of line, working on processing your grief, finding ways to support your grief has a cascading effect as well that can help help some of these other areas start to get back in line. And they can seem so unrelated. I think especially when you're not noticing, I think it's easier to notice negative effects than it is to notice as things start to slowly get better.
Yes.
So it and they can seem wholly unrelated, right? Like me meditating doesn't feel like something that's going to make me lose weight, but I can say that as I've worked on my mental mindset, done those things that have helped me energetically get more aligned, that I have started to lose weight, and it's not
Because you've
not
lowered your
because I'm
cortisol
dieting.
levels.
Yeah. Which are things we can't see. So I think they also make it hard to understand. And when you're already, that's what I think is amazing. You already had this background and experience. And even though I totally understand and can agree that even simply having an awareness of it does not mean you can control all of it, right? Like you're still going to experience, but you at least can see like, oh, I kind of can see the correlation and why things are happening. Because when I started out, I was just like, I don't understand what's happening. I don't understand why my brain is suddenly shutting down memories of Orion where I feel like he never existed. I look at pictures and I don't feel any attachment to him. He could just be like a random, or somebody's random kid. Like my brain would just lock all that off. And then I would panic because I would think, oh my God, am I forgetting him? Am I not going to remember him? Am I not going to feel, that connection with him? And really it was like my brain safeguarding because I was
protecting you. Yeah.
But I didn't understand all of that. And so then it would lead to like other probably negative effects of like more stress about reacting to the way my body was reacting.
What we're both agreeing with here was that we didn't know grief entailed all of this. I mean, I might have had a little bit of knowledge about stress and cortisol, but I didn't really relate it to grief and trauma because it wasn't my experience. But it also wasn't something that I'd come across or read about particularly in relation to grief and trauma. So when it happened to me, it was still a shock. And I was like, oh, okay, this is the cortisol. Oh, fight or flight. I'm stuck in fight or flight. Okay, what am I going to do about this? So I understood it, but I was still surprised that this is what grief entailed. And I think that's why I feel there's such a need for grief education because we're not the only people, who go through this. And yeah, it's there's just, and when people around us don't understand it, then that makes us feel isolated. So would you say because I think I see it in myself and people I work with, but did you feel quite isolated in what you were going through? Because no one got it.
Yeah, I think, obviously I didn't know. I knew a couple people that had experienced child loss, but by and large, I didn't know a lot of people. So there's that kind of isolation. But then I think beyond that even is the kind of isolation that like talking about nervous system dysregulation was not part of my vocabulary before Orion died. It wasn't a concept that I could even grasp, and I didn't know anyone else who talked about that either, right? Healthy self-awareness was not something that I knew about or talked about, and I didn't know anybody else who talked about that either. Boundaries. I did not, grow up in a world where we were conscientious about what healthy boundaries meant, what that looked like, and how to apply them. I had grown up in going to church, but I didn't know anybody who had, I guess, strong spiritual beliefs. I didn't know anybody who I felt like basically had the capacity to give me the space to explore what I believed and accept that. What I experienced as far as people I knew who were religious was censure and trying to basically course correct me back to the Bible and the church. So that felt isolating because I didn't have, I just didn't have a lot of support like that until I started to feel more confident in myself because I spent a lot of time reading books and seeking out, online resources that then when I became more confident in what I believed, then it was easier for me to talk to people in my immediate circle about it and feel comfortable. But I didn't have that initially. And that's not because the people in my inner circle were bad or mean people or whatever. It's just all of that was new to them as much as it was new to me. it wasn't anything that any of them were already doing or used to or familiar with. And so, and I was in a different place of need, right? Like I desperately needed to figure out all of these things to be able to survive. And nobody else was like in that position with me. So I think when we talk about isolation, it is common to talk about feeling isolated in your grief and in the sadness, and that nobody else understands how hard that is. But now, from my perspective further along on my journey, I realize it goes deeper than that even. It's realizing how isolated you can be in terms of all the other things you have to learn. Yeah. Really, I think that are necessary to learn to help support yourself. Yeah. So.
And I suppose if we were to kind of, say something not positive, I don't like using the word positive, about what we've been through, we have, I suppose, gained wisdom, understanding, a more spiritual openness, perhaps more compassion. We're trying to help others. So these, I suppose, are the gains of our terrible tragedies, really. Mm-hmm. Would you say? I don't know. That's kind of how I feel anyway.
Yeah, I would say a really big piece for me on my grief journey was obviously like the standard of acceptance, because I couldn't change it and I had to accept that, and that was a really big hurdle. But then following that for me was I had to come to a place of personal understanding about why did this happen? What could I accept in that regard? And for me, I believe that it was part of mine and Orion's soul plan, and that its purpose was that his death and this experience for me served as a catalyst. There's so many ways that I have grown and evolved and improved that never would have happened had I not been in this type of situation. I never would have pushed so hard. I never would have looked so far for answers. I never would have considered so deeply about where my life was and was that really what I wanted, and really taking ownership of what makes me happy and doing that instead. So I think catalyst, is a word I use a lot, because it feels like that. And I remember thinking that from the very beginning, that Orion's death changed me on like a cellular level, on a soul level. Yeah. And that felt really isolating. When I think that was one of my first thoughts after he died, that people didn't understand that I was now absolutely a different Whitney. I probably looked the same on the outside, but I was 100%.
No.
I was gone.
Yeah. I totally agree. And I think I agree with you about it being part of our soul plans, that we agreed this, that they didn't need to be here for long. Their job was to accelerate our soul growth and help us along. And we wouldn't have done that at the same speed, or if at all in the same way, had these events not happened to us.
Mm-hmm.
Much as
and part of that is...
I was going to say, much as we probably say, I'll trade it in to have him back, because that's how I feel. I trade it all in. But maybe our soul knew different. I was listening to James Van Praagh, the medium,
mm-hmm.
and he said, it's slightly related, but not. But he said that only 30% of our soul is here. The other 70% is wherever. And I thought that's quite interesting. So 70% of our souls are with our boys, which is quite a nice thought. But
I've heard that before. And I've heard that you don't bring like your full power down here as a soul, because if you did, then basically the struggle would not be as real, so you wouldn't learn as much. So you
Yeah,
come
yeah.
down here with kind of
You
like
can't have
a
too
half
much
battery.
awareness. If we knew it
But
all, then we'd be like, oh, okay. So we have to
but
kind
there
of,
are times, yeah, yeah. But there are times that I feel like it feels like my whole soul is experiencing this pain, or I have a
oh,
hard time,
God, yeah,
So I
yeah.
don't know how much
I wish it was only 30% of, then
hmm
30% pain, less pain, or 70% less pain
yeah.
would be fine. I mean,
Or
who
how many
knows?
times I strongly wished that I could be back on the other side again.
Oh,
And that's
yeah.
hard to imagine that if there's only a fragment of me here, how do I
Mm,
feel, how did I have times that I felt so strongly about that, and
I
not
know.
in a suicidal way, just in a wanting to be not experiencing this here anymore, wanting to just be done.
Home.
um, yeah, which is hard for people, I think, to understand.
I think it
And it
is.
scares some people to
Well, we
hear you
said the
talk
other
about it.
day, didn't we, that, bereaved parents tend to have no fear of death. I have no fear of death.
Yeah.
But other people find that deeply shocking. If you say that to somebody who hasn't lost a child, or, well, perhaps we shouldn't say just lost a child, but or had a devastating loss of some kind, then they just don't, they just can't. Lucky them, get it. But for us, it's like, yeah, when it's my time, it's my time, because I strongly believe we all have a time, and we come for a certain length of a life, and we don't know, we don't remember, and that's it for whatever. Our boys did all they needed to do, presumably.
Mm-hmm.
One day we might understand more and kind of go, oh, I see, it all makes sense now. That's what I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking forward to, because I don't know about you, but I have it in me to figure things out, to make sense. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like the whole of this grief journey has been trying to make sense of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And that's an ongoing
absolutely.
process,
Absolutely. And I think as a result of that is not only do I not fear my own death, but I don't perceive death in general the same way that I used to. I don't feel the same sense of loss that I would have prior to Orion dying. And that's not because I've already experienced such great loss that everything pales in comparison. It's more so a reflection of my spirituality now and
Yeah.
my absolute resolute belief in where we're going next, what it's like on the other side, and the absolute capability to still stay connected with those on the other side. It's not an ending, it's not a finality. And so when I observe, I've had some family members, like grandparents, pass since Orion, and I honestly felt jealous of them. Like, how dare they get to go be with Orion now? I mean, it happened about 6 months after he died, so I was still very much early in my grief. But I remember feeling more anger at them getting to be there now than I did any sense of loss at them not physically being present with me anymore. And they passed at the end of, a natural death at the end of a long life. So that obviously plays a part of it too. But yeah, your perspective changes completely as you seek this understanding and different perspective.
Yeah, it really does.
I wanted to talk about somebody who's struggling and feeling like, especially physically, that they're experiencing a lot of that, just, I don't know, like where it's probably a hormonal imbalance. They're aware of that, but they just don't understand even what to do to try and address it. I felt like for me that was a really frustrating part when I was like, okay, I get that I'm experiencing this. It's not necessarily my fault or something that I'm doing exterior. Like, I'm not binge eating a ton of food. I'm not sitting on the couch all day, just eating like bag after bag of potato chips or things. But I'm at the same time experiencing very low energy, struggling with weight gain, then having like low self-esteem because my clothes aren't fitting right because this is happening, and feeling like I'm stuck in this cycle and I just don't know how to break out of it, because I also don't have like the motivation to make myself go to the gym every day, or only eat salads all the time, or I guess the things that we commonly reach for when we think of like, oh, we're gaining weight, this is what we do to correct that. So what are some things that you would recommend, if any?
Well, yeah, I think first of all, and this is obviously a really difficult one, but as from an outside perspective, we have to be kind to ourselves. We've gone through something devastating. Of course, our body's going to go haywire. Sleep's going to be affected. We have no energy. We gain weight. We lose weight, whatever it may be. So just kind of go. So I tend to, when I'm working with people, I tend to normalize it and go, yeah, that's okay. I think the when you have to do something about it is further down the line. I mean, I do talk in Love Untethered about how, for a nutritional therapist, I suddenly was eating an awful lot of junk food, or not at all, because, and I did quite early on kind of go with it, because I know myself well enough to know that at some point I'll remember how to make a proper meal. I sort of forgot, and I just did what was easiest. So in the book, I do suggest lots of different things you can try, and I do try and normalize reactions. So I hope, and I think for the reaction I've got from people is that that it is a bit of a guide to how you can navigate through things you can do on a practical level. When I work as a nutritional therapist, it's not one size fits all, so everybody is different. So even every bereaved mother has a different set of issues. So it has to be sort of general advice. I work a lot with supplements as well. So I have a really good supplement that's had research that's shown it's as good as an antidepressant, but it's natural. I'll use lots of things like ashwagandha for the nervous system. But again, I can't recommend anything specifically in case somebody's on medication, it's contraindicated. But I do give general advice in the book, which I hope will be useful to people, because exactly what we're talking about. To begin with, you go, what the hell is happening to me? I don't get this. What am I meant to do? Is this normal? So I'm trying to go, yes, it's normal. It's confusing. Try this, maybe do that, see if that helps. If it doesn't work, do something else. So it is meant to be a guide, as I say, as well as telling my story. It's also a guide for trying things out, finding what works and going, it's okay. This is okay. This is normal. I mean, it's not normal, but it's your body's response to what's happened to you. Why wouldn't it go, hey, why would you have bags of energy or be able to sleep? That would probably be a bit odd if you did. So it's just going, hopefully it all gets easier. And we're kind of saying it has. So anyone listening in the early stages of loss, these things do settle down. And just know, if you're feeling that now, look for help, whether it's in my book or from, I mean, also because of the grief coaching I do, it's holistic. So it is mind, body and spirit. And it is quite hard to find anyone who is doing that. So you might have to divide yourself up, and go to different people who practice different modalities. But it does get easier. But some things continue to be challenging, and it would be probably misleading for us to not say that as well,
Yeah, I think that's so important, the first part you said about just having grace for yourself, recognizing like, just because it's like this right now doesn't mean that it'll always be this way. I think it can be hard for us to picture a future that's different in a positive way from where we are now. I think it's easier to imagine, or for me at least, where I would naturally go is like, oh my gosh, I've gained 30 pounds already. What if like in another 6 months I've gained 30 more and I'm 60 pounds, instead of thinking like, well, what if in the next 6 months I managed to lose like 10 of that? It just seems like it's easier for me to believe the worst case scenario, and I don't think I'm the only one who's like that.
Absolutely.
So,
but also, what if you
grace.
just go with it and go, this is how it is today. I'll worry about losing it later. I'll just prioritize what's important right now. What can I do something? And so we can't sort of shame ourselves into thinking, oh God, I'm doing this wrong. Why have I gained weight? Why can't I sleep? What's wrong with me? This isn't, you have to go, it's okay. And be kind to yourself. That's the bottom line. And it's very hard for us to do, to be kind to ourselves. We're kinder to other people. So imagine what you would do if you were advising someone else, perhaps, and then do it for yourself.
Yeah. And I think especially in grief, I remember frequently thinking like that I was embarrassed that I was gaining weight, because I felt like the common perception is that, oh, when you're so sad and depressed, you can't even eat and then you lose weight, right? And that it's this, at least in the US, this common storyline. And so then it made me feel like I attached other meanings to the weight gain of like, oh, people are going to think that I'm not that sad anymore because I'm not so depressed that I can't eat, and that I'm not, wasting away to nothing because I, can't function. Like that my body was reacting differently to this experience. And
a hormonal imbalance, a nervous system dysregulation. It wasn't your fault. But also sometimes people naturally, as well as that, sometimes people naturally eat more as a form of protection. So it's very complex. Everyone's very different. And yes, there are other people who lose weight, and this is why it's so individual. It's not the same for everyone.
Think more people talking about that it is individual, and not letting yourself think that you're doing it wrong or your body's doing it wrong, or that other people are going to look at you and think that you're you're not the you're not the stereotypical grief, that there must be something wrong. I think there shouldn't even be stereotypical grief. It should just be that. So more people talking about that to normalize that it doesn't happen the same for everybody.
Yeah, well, that's what we're both doing, trying to normalize anything anything that you feel is fine.
Yes, yeah. Well, Vanessa, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, I have 2 websites, but I'll give you my author website, which is vanessamay.co.uk. And my book, Love Untethered, which I have here, you can get from Amazon, Barnes and Noble. So it's called Love Untethered, How to Live When Your Child Dies. I always welcome feedback, so you can then email me or get in touch on Instagram, which is at may.wellbeing. So if you want to follow me there, I post about grief. That's where I found you. And yeah, so I love to hear from people and hear people's stories. And you can work with me with holistic grief coaching as well. Obviously, we have to be mindful of the time difference because I'm in the UK, but still, it's possible if anyone wants to look at a sort of mind, body, spirit approach to grief that's a bit different, perhaps.
Yeah, well, thank you. I will make sure and link your website in the show notes, and then people can find all your information. And I will say, I didn't get to finish your book, but I read the first half of it. And for those listening, it is a shorter read. It's not like a super long book. And I thought it was very easy to consume in like nice short chapters. It's a good read for somebody who's in a place that they, maybe aren't so great at reading right now, or looking to like try and take on a big book, but this is not that. It's definitely, I think, well written for grievers to consume.
I deliberately wanted it to be accessible, easy to read, bite-sized chunks that you can dip in and out of, and then, as I say, at the end there's the advice, which I hope will be helpful to people.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Vanessa, for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And I so appreciate you sharing your perspective. And I think it's going to help so many grievers normalize what they're going through too.
Let's hope so. Thank you very much.